The uneasy peace of Eliza's days did not last. It began with whispers low, simmering voices among the younger warriors, their glances sharp whenever the chief passed. Eliza noticed them first at the fires, where men sharpened their weapons and spoke with the fervor of restlessness. Though she could not understand their words, she knew enough to sense their meaning. Their eyes cut toward her too often, their laughter edged with mockery. The restraint her husband had shown was no secret. In a camp where strength was measured by dominance and tradition, his refusal to fully claim his white wife stirred doubt. Some saw it as weakness. Others saw it as betrayal of custom. One evening, the tension snapped. The warriors had returned from a hunt, their spirits high from success. Around the fire they gathered, passing meat, boasting of their kills. Eliza sat near the lodge, mending a garment under the watchful eyes of the women. She heard the shift in tone before she saw the cause, the laughter turning sharp, the words thrown like stones. The chief was there, seated among them, silent as he carved meat with a long knife. One of the younger warriors stood, his chest puffed, his voice rising. He gestured toward Eliza with a sneer that made her blood run cold. His words were clear enough, even without translation. He was mocking the chief for leaving her untouched, daring to question his strength before them all. The fire crackled. The air grew tight. Eliza's heart thudded painfully. She wanted to shrink back into the shadows, to vanish, but her body betrayed her, stiffening under the weight of so many stares. The young warrior's laughter rang cruelly, others joining in. Then the chief rose. He moved with deliberate calm, setting aside his knife. The laughter died as he straightened to his full height. His dark eyes burned as he faced the insolent warrior. Words spilled from him, deep and steady, his voice resonant with authority. He did not shout, he did not need to. The camp hushed, the firelight catching the lines of paint still faint on his skin, the beads around his neck clinking softly. But the young warrior did not bow. His hand dropped to the haft of his spear, his jaw tight with challenge. Eliza's breath caught. This was no longer mockery, it was defiance. If the younger man struck, if the tribe turned, her husband's rule could splinter in an instant. And all because of her. The chief stepped forward, eyes locked on the challenger, his voice ringing sharper now. He spoke a single word short, final, like the crack of thunder. The warrior flinched, his grip loosening on the spear. Murmurs rippled through the circle, but none moved to interfere. The younger man spat into the dust. His pride wounded and stormed away into the shadows. The camp remained tense. But the moment had passed. Slowly, the others returned to their meat, the talk subdued. Eliza sat frozen, her needle and thread hanging useless in her hands. Shame burned in her chest. His authority had been tested because of her, because he had shown her mercy. And though he had silenced the challenge, she knew more would come. His people would not forget. That night, when they returned to the lodge, she dared to meet his gaze. He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment, then sat on the fur with a heavy sigh, rubbing a hand across his jaw. For the first time, he looked weary. Eliza's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. He had risked himself to protect her dignity, to shield her from the judgment of his own people. He had chosen her not just once, but again and again, in ways no one else could see. And for the first time since her capture, Eliza felt the stirrings of something stronger than gratitude. It was loyalty not born of obligation, but of choice. That night, she did not lie as far away as before. The space between them still remained, but it had narrowed. Her heart whispered what her lips could not yet say, "I am yours." Not by force, but because you have earned me. And though the tribe did not yet see it, the truth had already begun to change her. Autumn winds swept across the plains, carrying with them the scent of dry grass and wood smoke. The camp prepared for the coming cold, hunters bringing in game, women tanning hides, children gathering brushwood. Life pulsed around Eliza, no longer as alien as it had once been. She had learned to carry water from the stream without stumbling, to braid her hair like the women did, even to understand fragments of their tongue. But more than these small survivals, something deeper had shifted within her. The Apache chief, her husband, remained a mystery. Yet he was no longer the shadow that haunted her nights. He had become her constant, her shield. She had seen his strength before his people, seen the risks he took to honor her, and felt the patience with which he treated her silence. What she once feared as possession had revealed itself as something else entirely, devotion without demand. Still, doubt lingered in her heart. Could she ever give herself fully to him? Could she cross the chasm between the world she had lost and the world she now lived in? The answer came on a night when the moon hung full and silver, bathing the camp in a ghostly glow. The fires had burned low, the drums silenced, the people wrapped in sleep. Inside the lodge, Eliza sat awake, her fingers tracing the beads at her neck, a gift placed there days before by the chief's own hand. He lay near, as he always did, his back turned, his breathing steady. She thought of the countless nights he had left her untouched, though custom gave him every right. She thought of the defiance he had faced to protect her, of the questions he bore in silence for her sake. Her throat tightened with a realization that stole her breath. She was no longer afraid. Carefully she shifted, her shawl falling loose. Her hand reached out, hesitated, then touched his shoulder lightly. He stirred, rolling onto his back, his dark eyes opening to meet hers. For a moment, they simply stared, the firelight flickering between them. Her voice shook, but the words came clear. "I am yours." He did not move at once, as though testing the truth of her words. His gaze searched her face, the lines of fear gone now, replaced by something softer, freer. Slowly, he sat up, his hand lifting to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His touch was reverent, almost hesitant, as though he could scarcely believe her choice, and it was a choice hers, not his. The silence between them shifted, no longer heavy with restraint but alive with promise. She leaned toward him, her heart pounding not with terror but with longing. His hand cupped her jaw, his thumb tracing her skin as if memorizing every contour. When his lips met hers, it was not the fierce claim of conquest but the tender seal of a union long delayed. Eliza's breath trembled against his. She had imagined this moment 100 times with dread, but reality undid her in ways she could not have foreseen. His strength was tempered by patience, his passion bound with care. For the first time, she did not feel captive. She felt chosen. The fire burned low, casting them in warm shadow. The walls of the lodge seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in a world remade. She gave herself willingly, her hands no longer clutching for protection but reaching, learning the language of his body as he had once taught her the ways of the earth. When at last they lay side by side, the distance that had once defined their nights was gone. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. His arm curved around her protectively, holding her not as a possession but as a treasure. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of release. She thought of the girl she had been, trembling in the firelight of her capture. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced terror, loss, and longing and found love in the most impossible soil. The Apache had claimed her as wife. But it was Eliza, in the end, who gave herself. And so, beneath the silver gaze of the moon and the quiet blessing of the stars, two worlds joined not through conquest, but through choice. Dawn filtered into the lodge through small seams in the hide walls, painting pale stripes across the packed earth. Eliza stirred awake to the unfamiliar warmth of a fur beneath her cheek. For a disorienting instant, she thought she had dreamt it all, the raid, the fire, the chanting voices, the heavy gaze of the Apache chief. But then she heard the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her, and the reality came, rushing back like a storm tide. He was there, still lying on the fur where he had rested the night before, broad back turned toward her. He had not moved closer. He had not touched her. A knot of tension in her chest loosened, though not fully. She sat up slowly, clutching her shawl around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on him. The weight of last night pressed against her thoughts. Why had he stopped? Why had he spared her when he had every right, by his people's custom and by the sheer power of his will, to take what he desired? The flap of the lodge opened then, and a woman entered with a bowl of food corn, beans, and strips of meat. Her gaze flicked between Eliza and the chief, who was now stirring awake. The woman said nothing, but her eyes narrowed, questioning, almost sharp. She set the bowl down and left, her silence louder than words. Eliza caught the meaning. They expected something else to have occurred. Something final. The chief sat up, his movements unhurried. He glanced at her briefly, then reached for the food. He broke off a piece of meat and extended it toward her. Eliza hesitated, her pride warring with hunger. Her lips pressed tight, but her stomach betrayed her, tightening painfully at the smell. Slowly, she reached out and took it from his hand. Their fingers brushed for an instant, calloused strength meeting. Trembling hesitation, and the spark of it startled her. She ate quickly, grateful though she dared not show it. When she glanced up, she found him watching her. Not like a man surveying a prize, but as if she were a puzzle he meant to solve. Later that morning, when he stepped outside, the camp buzzed with a low hum of voices. Men gathered around him, their tones sharp, questioning. Though Eliza could not understand the words, she felt their weight. Their glances flicked toward the lodge, toward her. Their voices rose, demanding explanation. He stood tall among them, his presence silencing even the boldest. He spoke firmly, his words cutting through their questions like a blade. His hand lifted, gesturing toward her lodge, then lowering with finality. The men grumbled, displeased. Some shook their heads, muttering as they stalked away. Yet none challenged him directly. His authority was absolute. From within the lodge, Eliza clutched her shawl tighter, her breath shallow. They had expected him to take her, to claim her fully, as was their custom. He had not. And now his decision rippled outward, shaking the foundation of his rule. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. He glanced at her only briefly before settling onto the fur, sharpening a knife with deliberate strokes. The scrape of stone against steel filled the silence. Eliza watched him, torn between fear and bewilderment. Why would he risk his people's disapproval for her? She had been raised to believe the Apache were savage, their hearts driven by nothing but violence and conquest. Yet this man, her captor, her so-called husband, had chosen restraint over force. Even when his people expected otherwise, the thought unsettled her more than if he had simply taken what he wished. It forced her to see him not as a beast, but as a man governed by rules she did not yet understand. That night, when the fire once more dimmed and the camp fell into quiet, Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the lodge. The chief lay beside her again, a careful space between them. She could hear the steady rhythm of his breath, feel the warmth of his body through the cool night air. For the first time since her capture, she felt something shift inside her. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest seed of it. The knowledge that he had chosen restraint gave her a strange, fragile courage. She whispered into the darkness, words he could not understand. Why? He did not stir, did not answer. But she thought just for a moment that the silence between them was not empty. It was waiting, and so she lay there, her heart no longer pounding with terror, but with a restless, unspoken question that would haunt her waking hours. What sort of man had claimed her, yet chosen not to break her? Days bled into one another, each sunrise bringing with it a life Eliza had never imagined she would live. At first, she counted them with dread, marking the time since her capture, since the moment her world had been torn away. But gradually, the rhythm of the Apache camp began to weave itself around her, pulling her into its pulse. The women, once wary, grew less sharp in their glances. Some still looked at her with suspicion, others with quiet curiosity, but a few began to include her in their tasks. She learned to grind maize with a stone, to stir pots of beans over the fire, to mend torn hides with sinew. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but she bore it silently. Survival required no less, and always he was there. The chief moved like the center of the camp's gravity. Men came to him with disputes, with plans for hunts, with news from scouts. He listened more often than he spoke, but when he did, his word was final. His people respected him, not merely for his strength, but for his certainty. He was a leader forged of fire and stone, yet Eliza began to see glimpses of something else, something quieter that few seemed to notice. Once, she saw him kneel to lift a child who had fallen near the cook fires. He brushed the dust from the boy's face with surprising gentleness, his stern features softening for the briefest instant. Another time, she caught him lingering by the lodge of an elder, listening patiently as the old man spoke in slow, wavering tones. He showed respect to those his people might have dismissed. Eliza could not reconcile these moments with the man who had claimed her. Each time she thought she understood him, he revealed another side she had not expected. And then there were the lessons. He began to teach her, though not in words, for she did not yet know his tongue. Instead, he used gestures, demonstrations, patience. He showed her how to shape an arrowhead from stone, his hands guiding hers until the flint chipped into form. He taught her to ride bareback, steadying her when she swayed, his hand firm at her waist. The horses, at first wild and intimidating, grew less frightening under his watch. At first, she resisted. She resented his nearness, resented the way her body betrayed her by responding to his steady touch with quickened breath. Yet as days passed, she could not deny the truth. She was learning. And with each lesson, she felt stronger. Less like a helpless captive, more like a woman carving a place in this strange new world. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in molten gold, he led her beyond the camp. They climbed a ridge where the land spread wide beneath them, rolling plains, dotted with dark trees, the horizon endless. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment she felt almost free. He stood beside her, silent, his arms folded across his chest. She glanced at him, and their eyes met. In his gaze, she did not see possession. She saw pride in the land, pride in his people, and to her surprise, pride in her for standing there at his side, unbroken. Eliza's chest tightened. She looked away quickly, her heart thudding with something unfamiliar. That night, as they lay in the lodge, she did not clutch her shawl quite so fiercely. The space between them remained, but it no longer felt like a chasm of fear. It felt like a bridge waiting to be crossed, and though no words passed between them, she sensed it, that invisible thread pulling taut, binding them in ways she could not yet name. She still thought of her family, of the world she had lost. She still prayed for deliverance, though her prayers grew softer, less certain. But beneath the grief and longing, a new question stirred, fragile and frightening. If she were freed tomorrow, would her heart truly leave as easily as her body? For already, against all reason, she had begun to see him not as captor, not even as husband by force, but as a man, one whose honor and restraint had planted a seed of trust in the most barren soil. The seed was small, but it was growing. The day passed in a haze for Eliza, though every sound and scent in the Apache camp burned itself into her memory. The bitter tang of smoke from cook fires, the rhythm of drums echoing against the hills, the sharp neigh of restless horses all became part of her captivity. She kept to the lodge where the women had left her, but the flap of its high door was never unwatched. 2 warriors lingered nearby, silent and vigilant, their presence a constant reminder that escape was impossible. When the sun dipped low once more, painting the sky in streaks of crimson, she heard a new sound rise over the camp, singing. Not the wild war cries she had heard in the ambush, but a solemn pulsing chant that carried weight and reverence. The voices of many men blended together, joined by the steady beat of drums and the rattle of gourds. The sound tugged at her, strange and foreign yet undeniably powerful. The lodge flap opened and 2 women entered. They gestured for her to rise. Eliza hesitated, clutching the torn remnants of her shawl. Their hands were firm but not rough as they guided her to her feet, straightening her posture as if she were some figure being prepared for display. One placed a necklace of beads around her throat, another smoothed back her tangled hair. When Eliza tried to resist, they silenced her with a single, steady look, not cruel, but commanding, as though reminding her that she no longer belonged to herself. With her heart hammering, she was led outside. The camp had transformed. Fires ringed the open space at its center, their flames leaping toward the night sky. Around them stood the tribe, gathered in a wide circle. The warriors' bodies gleamed with paint and sweat, their shadows dancing in the firelight. Women and children pressed close, their eyes reflecting the flames like jewels. All eyes turned to her as she was brought forward, and there he was. The Apache chief stood waiting, bare-chested, his bronze skin marked with fresh paint that caught the light like polished stone. Feathers crowned his dark hair, and a great necklace of claws and turquoise hung at his throat. In his hand he held a long staff decorated with ribbons and feathers, a symbol of authority that marked him as more than just a warrior. Eliza's knees weakened at the sight of him. He was fearsome, yes, but there was something more, an unshakable presence, a gravity that drew every gaze, every breath. She understood then why his people followed him without question. The women guided her to stand opposite him. She tried to lift her chin, though her insides trembled. She was a settler's daughter, raised in the quiet rhythms of prayer and hearth. What business had she standing here, beneath the burning stars, in a ceremony she did not understand? The chief spoke, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd. She could not follow the words, but the cadence was clear, a declaration, a binding vow. His people answered with chants, their rhythm rising and falling like the heartbeat of the earth. Then he stepped toward her. For one terrifying moment, Eliza thought he would seize her roughly, as he had on the night of the raid. But instead, he extended his hand. His palm was open, waiting, her breath caught. The women beside her nudged her forward, urging her to accept. Every instinct screamed to pull away, yet something in his gaze rooted her in place. Reluctantly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. A great shout rose from the crowd. The drums quickened, rattles shaking, voices rising in a fierce crescendo. Firelight leapt higher as if the very flames recognized the union. Eliza stood frozen, her hand enveloped in his calloused grip. She was aware of every detail, the rough warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his hold, the unwavering weight of his gaze. It was not gentle, but neither was it cruel. It was unbreakable. The chant slowed again, drawing to a close. The chief lifted their joined hands high for all to see. The tribe roared in approval, their voices carrying into the endless night. The ceremony was done. Eliza felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. She was no longer merely a captive. Before the entire Apache nation, she had been declared wife to their leader. Her heart pounded as she struggled to comprehend what that meant, what it would mean for her body, her spirit, her very soul. The chief lowered her hand but did not release her. Instead, he looked into her eyes for a long, searching moment. There was no triumphal smile, no mocking sneer. Only a calm certainty, as if he knew that destiny itself had been sealed tonight. When at last he let her go, the women returned to her side, guiding her back toward the lodge that now waited for her. But this time, it was not just a shelter. It was her bridal chamber. And as the fire roared and the drums faded into silence, Eliza knew the moment she had most dreaded was drawing near. The wedding night had come. The air inside the lodge was heavy with the scent of smoke and sage, its low ceiling pressing down like a weight. Shadows leapt across the hide walls where the firelight flickered, casting strange, restless shapes that seemed to mock Eliza's unease. She sat on a woven mat, her shawl clutched around her shoulders as though its frayed fabric could shield her from the fate that awaited her. Outside, the sounds of celebration still echoed, the last of the chants, the rattling of drums, the voices raised in songs of victory. They had celebrated her binding to the Apache chief as if it were a triumph of war itself. For Eliza, it was no triumph. It was a sentence. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he must hear it even before he entered. The flap of the lodge stirred, and there he was. The chief stepped inside, his tall frame filling the narrow space with an almost suffocating presence. He moved with the same quiet power he had shown before his people, but now there was no crowd, no warriors, no watching eyes, only the two of them. Eliza's breath caught as he looked at her. The firelight carved his features in sharp relief. High cheekbones, eyes dark as obsidian, jaw set with strength and certainty. She could not read his thoughts, but his gaze was unwavering, as though he saw not just her face but everything she sought to hide, her trembling hands, her shallow breaths, the terror she tried desperately to smother. He set aside the staff he had carried in the ceremony, laying it across the furs at the edge of the lodge. Then he moved closer. Eliza's fingers dug into the fabric of her shawl. Her mother's words came to her in a whisper from long ago: "Guard your virtue, Eliza, for it is your honor." But what power had she now to guard anything? She was no longer free. She belonged to him. When he knelt before her, her breath fled. He reached out, his hand brushing lightly against her wrist. She flinched, the instinctive recoil of a cornered creature. His brows drew together, not in anger, but in something almost like curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, he drew his hand back, giving her space. Eliza's fear tangled with confusion. Why did he hesitate? This was his right, was it not? Before his people, he had claimed her as wife. He had no reason to pause, no need to ask. Yet he did not seize her. Instead, he spoke. The words were low, gentle even, though she could not understand them. Still, the tone carried meaning. Not command. Not cruelty. Something quieter. Her eyes lifted to his, searching. He held her gaze steadily, his dark eyes unreadable but not unkind. With a slow, careful motion, he reached again, not for her wrist this time, but for the shawl she clutched so tightly. His fingers brushed the edge, waiting, not tearing it from her grasp. The choice, unspoken, was hers. Eliza's throat tightened. Her body screamed with fear, but beneath it, something else stirred, an ember of disbelief, of wonder. Could it be that this fierce warrior, who had conquered men twice his size and commanded the loyalty of an entire tribe, would hold himself back for her sake? Her hands trembled. She loosened her grip on the shawl just slightly, then snatched it back, clutching it to her chest again. She could not. Not yet. A silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Then, to her astonishment, the chief inclined his head as though acknowledging her refusal. He settled back onto his heels, his broad shoulders relaxing, his eyes never leaving hers. For a long while he simply sat there, silent, present, unyielding but not pressing further. Eliza's heartbeat slowed from its frantic rhythm, though it did not calm. Her mind spun. This man could take what he wished, yet he had chosen not to. Why? Was it respect? Patience? Or some deeper code of honor she could not yet understand? At last he rose. He spread a thick fur across the ground beside her, then lowered himself to lie upon it. His movements were deliberate, calm, neither threatening nor dismissive. He lay with his back to her, one arm tucked beneath his head. Eliza's breath caught again, this time not from fear but from the strange, shattering relief that swept through her. He would not touch her. Not tonight. For a long time she sat upright, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, her mind a storm of questions. Her body remained tense, her shawl clutched close, but slowly, so slowly, the weight of exhaustion pulled at her. She lay down at last, a cautious distance away, her eyes still wide open. The firelight dimmed, the drums outside faded into silence. Inside the lodge, two hearts beat in rhythm, separated by space yet bound by something far stronger than conquest. On her wedding night, Eliza had expected to lose everything. Instead, she discovered something she had never dared hope for. Mercy. And though she did not yet understand the man beside her, she sensed that this night had changed everything. The sun was dipping low in the western sky, staining the horizon in shades of blood and fire when the wagon train reached the narrow canyon pass. Dust clung to the wheels and the weary oxen snorted, their hides glistening with sweat. Families trudged alongside their wagons, their eyes fixed on the promise of land ahead, rich soil, fresh rivers, and the chance for a new life. Among them walked Eliza Whitfield, her bonnet tilted back, her face flushed from the heat. She was 20, with fair hair the sun had kissed into pale gold, and eyes like a wide, uncertain sky. Though tired, she carried herself with the quiet dignity her mother had instilled, chin lifted, shoulders straight, never letting hardship bend her spirit. Yet beneath her composure lingered unease. She had heard the rumors whispered at every campfire. Apache raids. Her father had dismissed them. Cowards tailies, he'd said gruffly, tightening the reins of his horse. But Eliza's heart had thudded every time the prairie grass rustled, or a hawk circled high overhead, its shadow skimming the earth. That night, the whispers became reality. It began with a scream, sharp, piercing, cut short. Horses reared. Flames burst from the brush, torches casting wild shadows. Then came the riders. Painted faces, hair black as midnight, eyes glittering with feral fire. The Apache warriors descended like a storm unleashed, arrows hissing through the air. Chaos erupted. Men grabbed rifles, mothers clutched children, oxen bawled and lurched against their yokes. The settlers' shots cracked the night, but they were scattered, disorganized. The Apache moved like shadows, their cries rising high, ululating, echoing from the canyon walls until it seemed the earth itself had turned against the travelers. Eliza stood frozen beside the wagon, her breath trapped in her throat. She saw her father lift his gun, fire once, twice, then a warrior lunged from the dark, knocking him to the ground. Her mother screamed, but the sound was lost in the bedlam. Hands seized Eliza's arm, strong, unyielding, smelling of leather, smoke, and the wild earth. She fought, clawing, kicking, her bonnet tumbling away. Her cries for help vanished into the roar of war. She was dragged clear of the wagons into the circle of firelight. There, towering above her, stood the Apache leader. His hair fell in long braids down his broad chest, feathers catching the fire's glow. His face was marked with streaks of red and black paint, sharp against his copper skin. Around his neck hung a string of claws and stones, tokens of battles past. His gaze locked onto hers, piercing, unrelenting, like a hawk sizing its prey. Eliza's struggles faltered under that gaze. There was no mercy in it, yet no madness either. Something colder, steadier. Command. The warriors gathered, circling their captives. Some wagons burned, their canvas tops collapsing into sparks. A few settlers knelt bound, guarded by watchful eyes. The leader raised his hand and the camp fell silent. Even the flames seemed to hush. He spoke in a tongue Eliza did not know, deep, resonant syllables rolling like thunder. The men answered with shouts, stamping their feet, rattling their weapons. Then he turned, stepping toward her. Eliza's chest heaved. She wanted to flee, but her legs would not obey. He reached for her wrist, lifting it high before his warriors. Another cheer thundered through the night. Though she could not understand the words, the meaning was unmistakable. He had claimed her. Her heart pounded as the truth struck. She was no longer Eliza Whitfield, daughter of a settler family bound for fertile land. She was a captive, a prize, her fate sealed by the will of a man who stood as both conqueror and judge. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. If this was to be her end, she would not face it broken. Yet inside, her spirit quivered with terror. She thought of her mother, her father, the life she had known, all swallowed by smoke and fire. The leader's hand tightened on her wrist, firm but not cruel. He studied her as though measuring something unseen, her defiance, perhaps, or the fear she struggled to hide. Then he released her and motioned to his men. 2 warriors flanked her, guiding her toward the darkness beyond the wagons. The night closed in, thick with the scent of ash and horse sweat. Behind her, the screams had faded into silence. Ahead lay only shadow and the unyielding presence of the warrior chief. Eliza's heart whispered prayers. She was not sure heaven could hear. She had been taken. The Apache had claimed her. And as the canyon swallowed her steps, she knew her life, every dream. Every certainty had been stolen in the space of a single night. The night stretched on as the Fihames, the Apache war party, moved swiftly through the wilderness, their horses sure-footed on stony ground, their captives half-dragged, half-led along the winding trail. The moon hung pale above them, a cold witness to conquest. Eliza stumbled often, her skirts torn and her shoes caked in dust. Each time she faltered. The warriors at her side urged her forward with sharp words she could not understand, though their meaning was clear enough. Her legs trembled, yet fear drove her onward. The canyon walls fell behind them, replaced by open plains where the prairie wind carried the faint cry of wolves. By dawn, they reached the Apache encampment. It rose from the earth like a hidden world. Clusters of lodges built from hides, smoke curling from fires already stirring to life, children darting like sparrows between the shadows. Women looked up from their morning tasks as the war party rode in, their dark eyes keen, measuring the spoils the men had brought. The prisoners, few who had survived the ambush, were herded to one side. Some settlers had been slain outright, their bodies left behind where they had fallen. Eliza did not let herself think of her parents. She could not bear the image. She fixed her gaze on the ground, clutching the remnants of her torn shawl around her shoulders. Then the Apache chief dismounted. He stood taller than most men she had ever known, his presence commanding even without words. The tribe parted to let him pass, their respect evident in the way they lowered their eyes or stepped aside. His long strides carried him straight to her. Eliza's pulse quickened as his shadow fell across her. She lifted her chin despite the fear coiling in her belly, refusing to cower openly. If she was to face him, she would not do so meekly. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, though his dark eyes seemed to pierce straight through her. Then, with a sudden motion, he seized her arm and drew her to the center of the encampment. The tribe gathered quickly, forming a wide circle. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces grave, while women and children pressed in behind them, curious eyes fixed on the captive white woman who stood trembling at their leader's side. The chief raised his voice, speaking words that rumbled deep from his chest. Though Eliza could not grasp the syllables, she heard the rhythm of them, the certainty. His hand gripped her wrist and lifted it high, as though presenting her to all who watched. The response was immediate. A great shout rose from the crowd, echoing across the plains. Weapons rattled against shields, feet stamped in thunderous rhythm. The sound made Eliza's heart lurch. It was celebration, approval, a tribal chorus recognizing what had just been declared. She understood then. He had claimed her. Before his people, he had named her as his wife. The realization struck like a blow. Her breath caught, and her knees nearly buckled, though he held her upright with unyielding strength. Her mind raced. Was this to be her fate? To belong to this man, bound not by choice but by conquest. The idea was both terrifying and incomprehensible. The women of the tribe began to murmur among themselves. Some regarded her with open curiosity, others with disdain. A few smiled knowingly, as though her future was already plain. Children pointed, whispering, their wide eyes filled with wonder at the pale-skinned stranger now woven into their lives. The chief released her wrist at last, but not before his gaze lingered on her face. His expression softened, just barely, but it was enough for her to sense something unexpected. This was not a man driven solely by cruelty. There was purpose in his claim, something beyond victory. Yet what purpose? She could not guess. Eliza's stomach tightened as two women approached her. They spoke quickly, gesturing toward a lodge at the far end of the camp. Though their voices were not unkind, their firm hands left her no choice. She was guided away from the crowd, her body stiff with dread. Behind her, the celebration continued, warriors singing, drums beating like the very heart of the earth. Inside the lodge, she sank to the ground, trembling. The hide walls muffled the noise outside, leaving her with only the sound of her own ragged breathing. Her hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream, to cry, to beg heaven for deliverance. But she swallowed the sound, forcing herself into silence, for she understood this much. She was not merely a captive now. She had been set apart, marked by the hand of the Apache chief himself. She was his chosen wife, and whatever awaited her in the hours to come, whatever fate the coming night held, was a destiny she could neither fight nor flee.